everybody. Welcome to the show. It's Monday. I hope you're feeling well. I'm feeling funky, so I'm just going to give you the advance notice. If I disappear, I'm feeling a little weird, but I'll come back, I promise you. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you about your tolerance for pain. Has nothing to do with me feeling funky. This is totally different. Do you think if you lived in Fargo or Philadelphia or like Baton Rouge or Tucson or San Diego, you would think about feeling pain differently? Do you think that you would think, man, that doesn't hurt? Or, yeah, that kind of hurts all the same no matter where you live in America? How about Idaho? How about Idaho? Do you think everybody in Idaho thinks about pain the same way? Like in this county, Latah County, where Brian Coburger got some news today he was hoping for? Do you think the people in Latah County think of pain differently than, say, the people in Ada County, where Boise is, 6 hours away? Do they think of pain and suffering and evil and heinous, atrocious, and cruel things differently? Because today, Brian Coburger was told that the people in this county, Latah, where he was standing, are not going to sit in judgment of his alleged knifing of 4 innocent kids in their beds. No, it will be somebody else in another spot in Idaho. Don't know which one yet, but are they going to see it differently? I'm going to dive into that in just a second because it's important. When it comes to heinous, atrocious, and cruel, it's about death, like his, as opposed to theirs. Okay, that's coming. Also, Sandra Birchmore. Yeah, I'm not letting this one go. I am pissed. And I found something on Friday that made me even more angry than I was before. I have 30,000 reasons for being angry. And that is that there were 30,000 text messages between Sandra Birchmore and her married, much older detective boyfriend, secret boyfriend, Matthew Farwell. But when she was found dead in her apartment from suicide, they said, okay, all those text messages existed, and yet somehow they couldn't find them on Matthew Farwell's phone. Do what now? Yeah, we're going to dig into that. I'm going to get the protocol and just how easy it is to find messages even when they're deleted. That's coming. Don't miss it, okay? Then also, remember how on Friday I told you about Casey Anthony? She's got a boyfriend who's married, 22 years married, and that whole marriage kind of blew up because he's this picture, right? Met her at the gym, they're together, she moved to Tennessee to be with him. So what a difference a weekend can make. The woman who is perhaps the most exquisite liar of all time, Casey Anthony, has been lied to because that fella has some other girlfriends. And tonight we've got the receipts and the women. So all of that coming up in just a moment, but let's start here. If there is a place on earth where the grisly murders of 4 innocent college kids in their own beds by a monster with a hunting knife is not considered heinous, atrocious, and cruel, that place is not on my list to vacation or visit. And yet it seems the lawyers for Brian Coburger think there might be just such a place somewhere in Idaho. They asked for and were just granted the right to move Brian Coburger's trial far away from that off-campus house where a massacre took place almost 2 years ago. A massacre that was so bloody and so heinous, the blood quite literally was seen dripping from the foundation, from the outside. They think that jurors somewhere else in Idaho are going to be different, maybe a little more sympathetic to their client. I don't know. But in his bombshell ruling, the judge agreed, citing as part of his reason presumed prejudice in the potential jury pool. And he also mentioned that Latah may not be up to the task of such a high-profile case, with the limited resources and the staffing in that little itty-bitty place. So what city in Idaho might actually be up to the task? Where is this more desirable venue with supposedly more open-minded, less revenge-minded jurors? That is certainly a question for NewsNation's senior national correspondent, Brian Enton, who's been covering the story for us from the very beginning. They're not saying where yet, but do we have an idea of where they might find this utopian land of, jurors that might find Brian Enton not so guilty?
Brian Coburger, you mean, not Brian Enton. But yes, this is Brian Enton.
Sorry. I told you, Brian.
Okay.
I told you I was feeling funky, right? Right off the top of the show. I am not feeling well. Something's up. You might actually have to take over Egg Creek for a little bit. But yeah, so Brian Coburger. Is there somewhere they're going to find Brian Coburger maybe not as heinous, atrocious, and cruel as Leitah?
Yeah, I think that we may see this get moved to Ada County, which is Boise. We don't know for sure. It's going to be up to the Supreme Court, Ashleigh, of Idaho. They're the ones who will have to make the decision. But the judge pretty much laid out that in Moscow, Idaho, Leitah County, where we've seen all the courtroom video from, it's very, very small. I've been there countless times. It's a small courtroom. You see the same couple of deputies every single time. There are very, very few deputies that work for the sheriff's office. There's only a couple of county clerks, and it's just not manageable, the judge says, for them to be able to handle a trial of this magnitude. So Ada County, Boise, Idaho, we had the Lori Vallow trial there. You remember, I've spent weeks and weeks and weeks there. It's a big judicial complex. It's a big courtroom. There's plenty of space. They've got the secret underground entrance for the jurors. So it seems like that could make a lot of sense based on the ruling.
Well, that all sounds great, except if you're the family members of the victims who, want to be there. Understandably, they want to stare Brian Coburger in the eye all through these proceedings. But it's like 6 hours away. If you go to Ada County down in Boise, it's like 6 hours away from, I think they're in Kootenai County, which is way up north. Were they consulted? Yeah. Did that weigh in at all to this? Look at that map. There's Leitah right up there, and Kootenai's even higher. It's a long drive.
Yeah, it's far, and that's one of the big issues here, and you feel for the families, because it's a 3-month trial, they think, Ashleigh. 3 months, imagine having to uproot your life. They have to rent a house. They have to be there for 3 months if they want to be there for the whole thing. So it's a long drive. They're very disappointed that the trial is being moved. There's going to be a new judge, which I found to be a bombshell. I wasn't expecting it. The judge also said he wants off the case. That is something that the family is actually happy about. They were not pleased with the judge. They also said today in a new statement, Kaylee Gonzalez's family, that they haven't exactly been pleased with the prosecution. They feel like they haven't been fighting hard enough. They didn't fight this change of venue argument hard enough. They didn't fight hard enough to keep it in Moscow, Idaho. I spoke to the Gonzalez parents and also to their attorney just a short time ago. I want to play you a little bit of that, Ashleigh.
You said, you got to be more aggressive. You guys have to be more aggressive. And they pushed back at us. And here we are 2 months away from 2 years and they're resetting. So we were right. We told them they needed to be a little more aggressive, maybe a lot more aggressive, somewhere in the middle. And, here we are today, and we were right. But we can course correct. We can get this fixed. We can get the right guy in the right chair, and we can go from there.
This isn't the end. This isn't the end of the road. This is not over. This isn't because I take it to heart, like that's a win for them, and it's like tick for tack. But, other people in the family have different mentality than that. And, they say, Mom, you got to look at the bigger picture. You got, you can't, it's not tick for tack. It's not tick for tack.
So you can imagine, Ashleigh, how difficult it's been for them and for the other victims' family members to think that now there's going to be a whole new venue. They don't know where it is. And on top of that, there's going to be a whole new judge.
Okay, Jen, I have this other question because last week we were talking about 13 filings that his defense attorneys put forth to Judge John Judge, who's still presumably hanging on until a new judge is appointed. But what do we know about those filings? They want the death penalty off the table, and they suggested all sorts of things, from it's unconstitutional to, the cruel and unusual punishment, et cetera. Where does that stand?
Well, we don't really know if Judge Judge is hanging on. I've been trying to figure it out. I was talking to Shannon Gray, the Gonzalez's attorney. There's a thought here, and it could happen that he's just done already, that the Supreme Court's going to decide, hopefully quickly, who the new judge will be, where this will move to, and the new judge will take over right away. And you mentioned this argument right now over the death penalty. The defense is trying to get it thrown out. Prosecution has to weigh in. There is a hearing set for November on that, Ashleigh, which is a big hearing. We all assumed that it was going to be in Moscow, Idaho. Likely not going to be in Moscow anymore, not going to be in front of Judge Judge. So is this going to delay things? Will that hearing still happen in November? Where will the hearing be? I mean, you can understand the frustration with the families not really knowing.
Yeah. I also heard Mrs. Gonzalez say something about they're going to get some new help in the chair. And I'm not sure if she was referring to whatever new county comes along is going to help out with prosecution. I don't assume that's the case. I assume these prosecutors will move to a different county, period.
Yeah, it's going to be the same prosecution, okay? It's the Latah County prosecutors, and then they've got the help of the state attorney general's office. What she's talking about in the chair when she says we're going to get someone new in the chair, she's talking about the judge. They're going to get a new judge, and she's happy about that. They feel like Judge has delayed everything, hasn't been aggressive, has taken too long to make decisions, pushed the trial out too far. So they are hopeful about getting a new judge. That is part of this that they are pleased about. They're not happy about the trial moving, but they are happy that they're going to be getting a new judge.
Okay, Brian Enton, thank you, but don't go too far. Like I said, I might need you in a little bit, so hang out through the show if you would.
You know, I always got you.
I so appreciate it. How personal is this? Like, we're having this conversation with the entire nation, right? But don't go anywhere. Also, just want to say this about this case. Thanks, Brian. In Idaho, like everywhere else, to sentence someone to death, the jurors have to find things called aggravating factors. Yeah, you know, those are the things that make the crime even worse than just a garden variety murder. In Coburger's case, the prosecutors claim there are 5. Okay, they say there's multiple victims. Murders were committed in the course of another crime. They say burglary. They said the killer exhibited utter disregard for human life and that the killer poses a future danger. And lastly, the murders were especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. That's important. The defense is, of course, challenging all of those, especially that last one. They say the term heinous, atrocious, or cruel is, quote, unconstitutionally vague, end quote. So I thought it would be important to take every bit of vagueness out of what happened to these kids. What happened to Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin on the night of November 13th, 2022. I don't want to be vague about it. I want to know exactly what happened to them and if it was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And for that, I bring in our friend Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a forensic analyst. He's a certified death expert. He's also the Distinguished Scholar of Applied Forensics at Jacksonville State University. Okay, Joe, the autopsy report, I'll just be frank, it said multiple stab wounds with a large military-styled knife, said that the wounds were, quote, pretty extensive, described as tears, big open gouges. There was also, quote, a little bit of bruising, and that the students bled out. Please tell me, although I feel like I know, but I think it needs to be on the record, how heinous, atrocious, and cruel is it to die by knife the way these kids did in their beds?
When a knife like this is used? This is 7 inches of steel. This is a K-bar. This approximates what they are alleging that was used. This is a military style knife. This is the sheath that we've heard so much about, okay? Or similar, USMC. It contains the knife, or did at one point in time. They haven't put their hands on the knife. Every time someone is knifed or cut, pain centers fire. You know, you think about a gunshot wound, for instance, and they can be very painful, obviously. But in my estimation, based upon all of the cases that I've worked, this is not a quick death. This is something that takes time. And it is the force that is applied over and over and over again. You damn right that it's heinous and cruel. And, you know, again, I'm no jurist. But, you know, I'm familiar with other cases where similar terms have been used to describe the pain and the anguish and the horror that victims have sustained. And Ashleigh, we've known each other for a long time. I've told you this before. Out of all of the cases that I've worked that are homicides over the course of my career, sharp force injury cases are the most brutal by far. There's nothing that really compares to them over and over. And it's a very personal, up close it's almost you talk about these injuries, they're talking about gouges and tears, and that's absolutely right, because they are so up close and personal. They talked about a little bit of bruising, and that can be explained. Either an individual was struck with an open hand or a closed hand, or as you see in that example that's placed up there with a K-bar knife, if you notice that there is a hilt there, that crossbar that exists. With knife wounds, particularly if the knife is fully buried into a human being's remains, well, not the remains, actually the living subject, it generates a bruise or a hilt mark that's left behind. And it's not surprising that they might find that. And of course, we don't have all of the details at this point in time, but I can tell you, Ash, that this was particularly brutal. And again, you have to factor this by 4. And this is over and over and over again for people. So yeah, this is a callous disregard for each one of these victims. It would be horrible enough if it was one person, but this is repeated time and time and time again. And to boot, we're talking about movement through a structure, going from floor to floor. This is purposed action. Now, I don't know if Coburger did it or not, but he's the one that's been charged at this point, and that has to be factored into this. And when all of this comes out and we see this in court, it's going to shock the conscience of everybody that's involved in it.
And I wonder how much it will shock the conscience of other jurors in other counties compared to the county where this happened. But I am curious about one other factor. Mm-hmm. You just described the physical pain. And it just feels so obvious to me. I can't even believe we have to have the conversation, but it is a court filing and it's a debate now that the defense wants to have about whether it's heinous, atrocious, and cruel enough for the death penalty. Pain is one thing. Terror is another. And when you talk about heinous, atrocious, and cruel, I can imagine the pain being all 3 of those adjectives, but also the terror being part of that. Yeah. Describe for me what a victim goes through having this happen so unexpectedly, in a safe place like your bed.
Well, it's an immediate adrenaline rush. You've got this pumping that's going on, shallow breathing, and it's a shock to the senses. I've heard people describe many times that initially and these are survivors of attacks that I have interviewed individuals on where others had died. And they will say initially that they couldn't believe that it was happening, but all of a sudden they had this awareness where they're being stabbed and they were aware of the pain at that moment in time. So no one expects this to happen. One of the things that's always troubled me about this, Ash, is the fact that sheath was found on the bed, and it almost seemed dramatic to me, like someone would have entered into that room, maybe on their knees on that bed, and stood over these individuals and dropped that sheath, presenting the knife before the victims. Now, I don't know if that's what went down or not, but that's quite dramatic, and that's quite terrifying to me.
I suppose they'll have somebody testify as to what it would be like for them on the stand, whether it was quick or whether it was not quick at all, and if there was terror and pain and all the rest, so as to satisfy those elements of heinous, atrocious, and cruel. But I knew you'd have the explanation. Joe, thank you. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Ash.
Joseph Scott Morgan joining us live tonight, and still to come. If you or I had a secret, inappropriate, maybe even illegal relationship with a person who turned up dead, and if that relationship was spelled out in 32,709 text messages, I think it's safe to say we'd have a lot of explaining to do, right? So why didn't Matthew Farwell? Why didn't he have that explaining to do? He's the former police detective who has finally been charged more than 3 years later in the murder of his young and pregnant mistress. Oh, wait, maybe I just answered my own question there. 32,000 reasons why things are looking very stinky at every level within the cops who touched this case. Next. Still with you. I'm not a detective. I'm also not here to tell detectives how to do their jobs, but I do want someone to tell me how 30,000 text messages can possibly add up to nothing to see here. The actual number is 32,709 text messages, but who's counting? Apparently no one was counting. These were messages that a married Massachusetts police detective exchanged with his young, pregnant mistress in the last year of her life. Of course, I'm referring to Sandra Birchmore, who was 23 years old and 8 weeks pregnant when she was killed in 2021. And Matthew Farwell, who, according to those text messages, took Sandra's virginity when he was 27 and she was 15, aka statutory rape. Documents show that as early as Feb 9, 2021, just 5 days after Sandra was found dead in her apartment, a Massachusetts state trooper got Farwell's consent to search his personal cell phone. Good start. And then 2 months later, his work phone was searched when he was placed on administrative leave. Also good. A memo states, and I quote, Matt had said in a previous interview that he deleted all communications with Sandra. And wouldn't you know it, nothing was found. Well, he deleted them, so they're gone. So there's nothing there. There's no there. The troopers also searched Sandra's laptop, and guess what? Yeah, they found some there. 32,000 theres there. In a report from August of that year, Massachusetts State Police Sergeant John Fanning writes, Sandra's laptop gave me access to approximately 12 months of iMessages, social media content, and other documents / databases. Matt and Sandra texted thousands of times over the year, as well as communication with many other friends and family of Sandra. It was clear, based on texts with Matt, that he and Sandra had a sexual relationship, as he told us in his previous interview. To be clear, other documents that came from the FBI show that what Farwell told investigators was a bald-faced lie. That, quote, he had only had sex with Birchmore 2 or 3 times in the previous year, end quote. Let me say that again. He had only had sex with Birchmore 2 or 3 times in the previous year, end quote. And here's what gets in my craw. All of this information was known to police shortly after Sandra was found dead. Yet Detective Matthew Farwell wasn't charged with Sandra's murder for another 3 years. 3 years. I want to stop here and bring in my go-to expert on digital forensics, Jake Green. Okay, Jake Green, there has to be some explanation, or maybe it's just gross incompetence or something else. What is it?
We can only hope it's not gross incompetence. We really, truly hope not. With cell phone forensics, if we are hamstringed into only being able to examine a certain singular piece of evidence, we're missing really, truly the forest for the trees. Even if this defendant had deleted these messages, did he delete it 5 minutes before walking in to do this download, or did he download or did he delete these messages years ago? We have to go beyond in order to provide an accurate opinion on what has occurred with these messages. Even if these were deleted years prior, we still have the ability to look at the text messaging databases on an iPhone and tell you whether or not these messages, if we see gaps in these messages, to see that there are definitely 32,000 messages missing.
Okay, so many questions there. Number one, I keep hearing about a program called Cellbrite, Cellbrite. Apparently, it's not that fancy, and it is a normal tool used by investigators to get, say it with me, deleted text messages. Is that true?
I think it's pretty fancy. Is it something that in the early days of my law enforcement career working on cell phones, I didn't have training in it, but I was able to figure it out, maybe because I'm a computer nerd. But it's definitely something that when we get asked these very detailed questions that requires an expertise, you can spit out what the software tells you, but you can't render an opinion of was something there, when was it deleted. If we capture only a limited extraction, and based on the way I read the letter from the attorney to the state police saying you can download a partial or portions or specific items, I would love to know what those specific items were. Because even when we have a deleted message, there are other places that we can look if we do a proper investigation of that phone to attempt to A, recover messages, but B, also identify things that are within the contacts database that tells us about when was the last time this person was contacted, how often, how frequent are they within this person's most frequent contacts. So it's pieces like that would have really, truly helped law enforcement. And then after that phone walked out of that download that day, God knows what's happened to it since then. But I can tell you in 2021, there was a lot that could have been done with that phone. And again, Cellbrite is an amazing tool. There are many out there that do very similar. But in 2021, our office had the ability to do a full file system extraction of this phone, which would have rendered much more information about what was messing off of the phone.
I mean, I can't even believe we're having this conversation. She had 30,000 messages they found. He had deletions. What else do you need? You know, like, this is just maddening. Thank you, Jake. Really appreciate you being on tonight. And I love that you're a nerd. Don't ever apologize for it.
Never will.
It's a good thing. All right, Jake Green joining us tonight. Still to come, I want you to think about this for a second. If somebody overdoses and then dies, who is ultimately responsible? Is it the person who died for taking the drugs in the first place? Is it the person who put the drugs into that victim's hand? Or let's just keep going. The person who sold the drugs to the dealer? Like, how far up the line should we go? Tonight, the so-called Ketamine Queen is now formally charged in the death of TV star Matthew Perry. She never met Perry in person, but does that matter? Her lawyer is someone we all know very well, Mark Garagos, and he joins me next, not as a legal analyst or legal commentator, but as the attorney trying to keep the Ketamine Queen out of prison. Stay right there. When a friend dies, it never really leaves you. And when a TV friend dies, kind of feels the same, weirdly. And that's why it's hard to believe it's been almost a year since Matthew Perry died in his hot tub. Apart from the sadness of losing a guy we kind of felt like we all knew, people got angry. They got angry that somebody gave Matthew enough ketamine to knock him out to the point of drowning. And just last month, police closed in. 5 somebodies were arrested. 2 of them doctors, 1 of them his assistant, and 1 was a woman that friends and associates of hers dubbed the Ketamine Queen. And it is not the nickname that you want going into court charged with killing a beloved member of the cast of Friends. And to that end, her lawyer takes great issue with that name and the fact that she's being associated with Matthew Perry at all. He says she never even met the actor. And that lawyer is Mark Garagos, and he's here tonight to explain himself. So, hi. So tonight's different. Let's just be really frank.
Hi,
we
Ashleigh.
do stuff all the time, you and I. Yeah, you're helping me, muddle through stuff I don't know, and you're an analyst and a helper and, big friend of this network. But I got to be tough on you because I actually take issue with the fact that Ketamine Queen wasn't something that the media dubbed this client of yours. Neither did the feds. It was her own associates and clients, according to the feds. But you say that it's not a fair moniker.
I've been sitting on the discovery, without revealing anything that's under seal, for 6 months. This is a complete invention by the feds. Was not a moniker that she ever had. In fact, if you take a look or read any of the interviews with everybody, and by the way, it's literally in Hollywood a feeding frenzy right now. Nobody is saying that they knew anything of the sort. In fact, they have the exact opposite opinion. She's sweet, nice, very kind of welcoming human. And so, yeah, I do take offense to it. I take offense to the fact that they indicted her as the Ketamine Queen in the indictment. I take offense to the fact that the person who actually injected Matthew Perry, by his own admission, the doctors who called him a moron in texts and how much would he pay, all of them are out walking free right now. And she, who never met him, is not. And so that tells you an awful lot about what really is going on here.
Yes. That is interesting because I do have a question here that I noted for you. Like, why she's still in jail, 25 days since the arrest, no bond. But the judge is not, holding bond back because of this. apparently it's due to another charge that hasn't been shared. What's the other charge?
The same case. There's no different case. She was arrested earlier this year. She was released earlier this year. She has complied with all terms of her release. The new arrest was not because anything happened while she was out. It was because they indicted these other people. She was thrown in with them. They revoked the bond. It's as simple as that, and it's outrageous as that.
So let me ask you this as well, because some of the comments that you've made publicly suggest, let me see, there's something to Newsweek magazine about, your client doesn't even know or didn't even know Matthew Perry.
Right.
But as you and I both know, it doesn't matter. You don't have to know. Right, but that doesn't matter, right?
You don't have to know
doesn't
somebody.
matter if she knows or doesn't know.
Correct. However, first of all, remember, she was arrested, time number one, released on bail. Matthew Perry had already tragically passed away. Everybody knew that he had tragically passed away, including the medical examiner, who, by the way, did not call this a homicide. He called, take a look at the death certificate, take a look at the coroner's report. So they invented a homicide, which arguably, I can see where there would be a homicide. If I inject you, Ashleigh, with a fatal dose of something, that could be a homicide. However, she did not do the injecting. She never met him. She didn't sell anything to him. There's nothing linking her except the words of co-conspirators who are already cooperating and trying to get out of their culpability or liability. I don't think that's enough.
I do want to say, the feds say that she provided the dose that killed him, that she knew the drugs she provided were going to a known addict, and she knew that ketamine was fatal if misused. So it's not that she doesn't know. She didn't inject him.
Let me just ask you one question. Right. Let me ask you a question. You've got a lot of experts over the years. I've watched, I've participated in your shows. I've tried my fair share of cases, homicide cases. I've never, ever had a toxicologist who told me, I'm going to go take a look at this body. I'm going to take the blood. I'm going to run a tox screen, and I'm going to link it to a specific dose that somebody else had a possession of. It's an impossibility. There is no such test. There is no such scientific evidence. I mean, break down what the feds are telling you. They can't link it. Nobody has linked it. There is no science that can link it.
I knew you'd be good at this. That's why we always ask you back, and I'll ask you back again. Mark, thank you. Appreciate it.
Get well.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a kind of a trying 41 minutes, and it's not over yet. All right. Thank you, Mark Garrigo. Still to come tonight, folks. Some say Casey Anthony pulled the wool over the jury's eyes when she was acquitted of her daughter's murder. But now, 13 years later, it kind of looks like someone might be pulling the wool over her eyes. Days after that bombshell dropped that Casey's got a brand new married boyfriend, 2 women say they've been dating him too. Like now. And they've got the receipts, and we'll show them next. Lying and keeping secrets has always been second nature to Casey Anthony. It was on full display back in 2011 in that courtroom when a jury found her not guilty of murdering her 2-year-old, Kaylee. Casey got quite the free pass back then. So you would think 13 years later she'd be able to spot a liar when she saw one. Turns out not so much. Last week, news broke that Casey blew up a 22-year marriage by having an affair with a married father of 2. She reportedly met him at a South Florida gym and then even moved across 2 states to be with him in Tennessee. But when the New York Post broke that news, it apparently unearthed a whole lot more news about her new flame, Tyson Ray Rhodes. First, that Casey's Prince Charming may not be exclusive to her either. He's reportedly active on the dating app Hinge behind Casey's back. Second, he was still on Hinge and looking for hookups even after the story of his affair with Casey broke last week. How do we know? Because 2 women have come forward to the New York Post and they have the receipts to prove it, which is why I now bring in Steve Helling, senior writer for the New York Post and the very reporter I sat next to week after week after week after week covering Casey together. And it's why we will always have this bond. We will always have Casey. What is the deal with the 2 other women? What's the story?
Ashleigh, I'm almost speechless, which is a bad thing when you're on TV. But, these women came forward and they had receipts. They actually had screenshots, which I got to see, I got to read, of their conversations with Tyson Ray Rhodes. And one of them actually said to him, you're in the New York Post right now, and sent a link to the story. And he wrote, yep. And then he still asked if she wanted to go out with him. And she's like, no, I think I'm going to pass. So that's
this is like a football date for Saturday. They were supposed to go on a football date together while the New York Post is like still sitting fresh on the counter.
I mean, he started the conversation by saying, good morning, with a little football emoji. And she was like, hey, what's your last name? And when he said Rhodes, she's like, you're in the New York Post. And that's where that came from. And then the other one had been talking to him on and off for a long time. And same type of thing. They had talked as recently as the end of August, beginning of September. So, a week ago. And if he's been dating.
Is he sending this second woman? Okay, so the first woman's like, no football for you. I'm going to pass. But then the second woman, he's sending good morning, beautiful text messages. Like how recently?
A week ago. So, and we know that he got together with Casey in January. So, a week ago is 8 months into the relationship. So, and here's the thing. We don't know what Casey knows. We have no idea if she knew that he was on Hinge. I'm guessing she didn't. And as bad as I feel for blowing up anybody's spot, when you're talking about Casey Anthony and her orbit, it just seems like everybody just lies to everybody else. That's kind of the MO there. And it seems like perhaps this guy who she's involved with might not be everything that she thought he was going to be.
Well, she karma's a bitch, right? So I remember you and I, on breaks between court, sitting on the floor by that window in the Orlando courthouse, kind of just shaking our heads like, holy, insert rhymes with hit. I just never seen lying like this. That part is not in dispute. Casey Anthony is an exquisite liar and strung everybody along for years, and continues to this day. But now she's getting a taste of it. If this is all happening, she's met her match.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, and you and I talked about this so many years ago in court, she would tell these lies, and there was always a moment where you're like, well, maybe. And then all of a sudden you think, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But, she said it so convincingly, it would make you stop for a second. And I think it's really interesting that now she's with somebody who, clearly, I have spoken with his ex-wife, or wife. Ex-wife is the wrong word because they're still married.
Still, right? Yeah.
Spoken with his wife who, was blindsided by the whole thing. It seems like he does a good job of saying whatever he wants to say, whether or not it's true. So, I guess that's the reality when you talk about Casey Anthony's new boyfriend.
Birds of a feather. I also just want to...
A pot to every lid and a lid to every pot. That's what we got here.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, for all the people who are commenting saying, why are we even talking about this? For the same reason we talk about OJ on the golf course when he was still alive. Because when somebody gets away with something where there was clearly some there, they don't always get away with it. They still have to answer to karma, and they still have to answer to the community, right? Yes, she was acquitted of murder, but you and I both know there was something awful that happened to that little girl, and Casey was all around for it. Maybe not murder, but You and I will have another meal over this and say,
yes, we
holy hit. Steve, thank you. Appreciate it. Call me. Okay, so Steve continues to do amazing work like every day. Still ahead, if you're going to drink too much, it can be a blessing not to remember the night before, but not always. And being drunk won't get you off the hook either if you do something really dumb or illegal, like grand theft casket, complete with corpse inside. A very strange night in Vegas. Where else? When we return. Every good story has a lesson, but this last story, it's got 3 lessons. If you drink to the point of blacking out, get help. People will steal anything, especially drunk people. And that line about stuff that happens in Vegas, it doesn't stay in Vegas, and it never has. And case in point, late last month, a woman was caught on surveillance video breaking into a business called Affordable Cremation and Burial Service of Las Vegas. Catchy. She smashed the front window. She reached in to unlock the door, and she made her way to a viewing room, where she then commandeered a casket and wheeled it back out the same way she came in. She may or may not have realized that there'd been a wake there just a few hours earlier and that the dear departed was very much still inside that casket. The perp left both the casket and the occupant outside the funeral home. 2 days later, Patricia Sierra, age 47, was recognized at a convenience store. She was arrested, but she said she didn't remember any of it, though she did acknowledge that was indeed her in the video. Allegedly, she told police that she blacked out after a half-dozen beers and had burgled while intoxicated before. Tonight, Ms. Sierra is charged with burglary, grand larceny, and disturbing human remains. Her bond is set at $11,000. So that happened. Hey, I made it. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this program. Now, I task you with sticking with Chris Cuomo because his show's starting now. Thanks for being here.
Hey, I'm Chris Cuomo. Thank you for joining me here at NewsNation, and thank you very much for the well-wishing on our very bittersweet journey of taking our only son off to university. We just landed. I wasn't supposed to work, but I had to. I had to come make my witness because on the eve of the debate, we have a problem that we just have to stop in its tracks before tomorrow night, okay? Tomorrow night cannot be a stupid fest about whether Haitian migrants are eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Okay? And it's not just the ugly and obvious nature of what that's about, right? That is about pushing prejudice. That's all it's about. That's what it's always been about, okay?